Welcome back to In Between Sessions, the podcast about what you can do between therapy appointments to support your mental health. I'm your host, Lili Torre. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Kansas City. And today I'm joined by Kate Aragon, a registered dietitian based in St. Louis who specializes in eating disorder care and body image work. Kate works with the Tasty Balance dietitians, which, if that sounds familiar, may be because we spoke to Janine Gardia from the Kansas City location last season. If you haven't heard that episode yet, I highly recommend you check it out. The folks from Tasty Balance are amazing. In Kate's work as a dietitian, she takes a weight-inclusive, compassionate approach to her work, blending clinical expertise with a social justice lens to have the kinds of nuanced conversations about bodies and health that most of us never got to have growing up. She's also currently developing body image workshops specifically for teenagers, which I was lucky enough to get a preview of, and was also part of the reason that I reached out to Kate to be on this podcast. In today's episode, we talk about body image and the current cultural moment, which, let's be honest, is a lot right now. Kate and I get into all of it, from talking about GLP-1 medications, the return of low-rise jeans, to the quiet shrinking of body positivity in mainstream spaces. We also talk about where the inner critic actually comes from, why weight loss so rarely delivers what we hope it will, how to start building a different kind of relationship with your body, and why moving from body hatred to body neutrality, not love, just neutrality, can be an incredibly meaningful step. This is one conversation I think a lot of people need right now. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hi, Kate. What have you been doing in between sessions?
Okay, let's see. Since I've been really getting into art lately.
Me too.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, no way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's been so fun to just craft, or lately I've been crocheting a lot.
Cool.
Something in front of the TV to do with my hands. So I've been doing like a lot of that. I'm making garments with it, purses, tapestries.
That's so cool. I love that.
Yeah, my house is like crocheted to the max.
Everything's crocheted. You have a crochet couch, bed.
Costumes for my dog.
Yes, the most important. Yes, should have led with that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that so much. I love the idea of like crocheting while watching TV. I've been talking with a lot of people in my life about like second screening and like this whole thing of people like scrolling on their phones while they're watching TV. And I heard an interview somewhere with like a TV writer, and she was talking about like she wrote something for, I think it was like Netflix or something. And they came back and they said, it's good, but it's not second screen friendly. And she was like, what do you mean by that? And they were like, well, because people don't just watch Netflix, like they scroll on their phones, and like this plot is too complicated. People will like check back into the show and they're not going to know what's happening. So basically you need to dumb it down. And since I heard that, I was like, I will never second screen again. Like I am not going to be part of the problem. And so I love the idea of like, we have this habit of like wanting, like of doing something with our hands or doing something else while we're watching TV. And so I love the idea of like crocheting, sort of replacing that.
Yeah, that's like an interesting thought. Like, I feel like now a lot of people, I don't know, just don't know how to be bored anymore.
Yes, absolutely.
And because of that, I feel like, you know, opportunities for us to really think more deeply is kind of stunted. It's like if it's too complicated, I'd rather just like dissociate elsewhere on my phone.
Yeah. And I definitely think it's related to like the dopamine hits that we get from our phone, because of course, like it was designed for that.
Right.
That like we feel this need for like constant stimulation, for constant dopamine hits. I also think this is why I have a lot of clients who talk about like when I'm relaxing, I feel like I can't relax. Like there's that like, how could I make this relaxation more productive? And I think that it is that like craving of dopamine, of like that feeling of like, I can check this off the list. I can get this done. I can get this done, because we're used to getting that so much from our phones. And so, yeah, I think like now it feels almost like intolerable to be bored. But you're right. I think there's so much good that comes from that.
Yeah. And to really just like find things that help us to slow down without just sitting still, because I can see how that's just hard for people to go from being super stimulated at work, at school, to just sitting in silence.
Yeah.
So at least I feel like with having a craft or just a fidget of some sort, and a craft is a little bit different from a fidget, in my opinion, just because it, I don't know, comes with like a sense of accomplishment, seeing the end product.
Yeah.
And I think that's just like rewarding to see it through also. So yeah, that's why I've been really into art lately.
Yeah. And definitely like engaging that obviously creative part of your brain in a way that maybe like a fidget doesn't. But yeah, I've been doing this program called 75 Art.
Okay, you're going to trigger me for a second.
Yeah, definitely not 75 hard. Frequent listeners to this podcast, all of my clients would be like, excuse me, what?
Yeah, that's funny. I'm going to look that up.
I think it's a play on words there, but 75 Art. And the woman who leads it, her name is Jenna Blackburn. And I have really been loving it. You just draw every single day for 75 days. I think today, as we're recording this, I think is day maybe 68. So we're getting like really close to the end. I'm pretty sad about it. But as someone who does not identify as a visual artist in any way, shape, or form, this has been like such a wonderful challenge to myself. And I think, you know, what I personally have found is a willingness to, like slow down, to be intentional with what I'm doing, like focus on the task at hand, a willingness and a greater tolerance to like be bad at something.
Yeah.
And sort of like release from the outcome, because I'm drawing something every day. Like I don't have time every day to spend like 3 hours on like a gorgeous something. Like sometimes it's a stick figure and like that's what I did. But yeah, it has been really just like creatively really joyful.
That's awesome. And I think like that's really cool too. Just knowing that every like progress is not linear. Every time you have a new prompt, it's not going to be like your best piece, and really take that time to, you know, welcome mistakes and progress, just like you're building any other skill.
Yes, absolutely. And it's going to feel like I'm like totally setting up this transition, but it's making me think about the work that people do with their relationships with their bodies, that it is a non-linear journey, that it's not something you just like become great at overnight. It's not those like quick hits, those quick wins. Like it is an ongoing lifelong journey. And that is, of course, a big reason of why I wanted to talk to you today. And so I'm so curious to hear sort of your thoughts on how people's relationships with their bodies and kind of your perspective on that and how it supports people's mental health.
Yeah, I think like we're doing this talk or having this conversation at a really interesting time.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who are noticing, you know, coming back of inspo, low-rise jeans, of course, the conversation about GLP-1s, just reducing how prominent a lot of our body positivity representatives have been like in the last decade or so. So yeah, like body image has been kind of hard for a lot of people lately. And I think kind of like what you said, it's a skill that we have to build. So I like thinking of it as a relationship between our minds and our bodies, right? So like if our minds only speak to our bodies in hypercritical ways, or in talking about it in judgment, or just not being pleased, then how can you expect there to be a good relationship between the two?
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, I think it's so interesting and like complex, the relationship between our minds and our bodies, and then like food and our bodies, and like thoughts about food and movement. Like there's so many like components that contribute to this, in addition to, you know, the things we talk about a lot, like social media, the images and narratives that we're hearing all the time, our favorite celebrities and influencers and body positivity spokespeople, and seeing, you know, all of this change, that we've kind of gone from a place of body acceptance to a place of almost more like accepting, wanting to change our bodies. And I think that there should be an acceptance of that impulse and that desire and where that comes from. But it almost feels like now where I think we were getting to a place of accepting that like we actually have very little control over the size and shape of our bodies. It feels like now like you don't have to accept that anymore, actually. And so if you are in a larger body, like you're choosing that. And so I can criticize that.
Yeah, that's so true. And I hear like clients say the same thing all the time of like, I don't know if I really have like an excuse anymore, especially if my doctor keeps pushing this drug on me.
Gosh, yeah, an excuse to exist in the body that I exist in. That's pretty brutal.
Yeah. And like these body image conversations, I think, tie so closely with therapeutic work just because it's something that we develop at such a young age when we are told what good bodies, good with air quotes,
yes,
are like, or getting input from several different groups of people, the home, coaches, social media, any sort of like childhood TV shows telling us what our bodies are supposed to be like, and just ostracizing people in larger bodies from a very young age until they show up in our offices, right? To actually talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I talk with clients all the time about like, this is like the tea that we're steeped in, you know, it's all around us as we're also trying to heal from it. And the messages are changing and the hard parts are changing. And that makes it like an ever moving target and an ever evolving challenge. So I'm curious, you know, with your work as a dietitian, so much of, you know, what you're working with people on is food and what they put in their bodies. And so I'm curious about how you kind of have these conversations with people about the relationship between those actions and the ways that they feel about their bodies.
Yeah, I think it's a little like the path that we get to body image is almost never starting at body image. People usually come to me asking for, how do I lose weight? Or the food noise is so loud, like, what can I do about it? And they usually think that there's some secret supplement that'll fix things.
Yeah.
But sometimes I entertain the idea of like, okay, if we were to get into this body that we think is socially acceptable, what if that means the life that you engage in is not really one that you want anymore? You know? Like in pursuit of this body, we're thinking about food all the time. We're sacrificing our social health because we have to stay home in order to eat these foods, and your world just becomes smaller. Like, is that what you feel like life, you know, like a satisfying life for you? And then we start talking about body image.
Yes. Yeah. What are you hoping that losing weight will change in your life? And because I think that's definitely a disappointment that I've seen in some clients that I've worked with. It's not uncommon for people to come to me having lost a lot of weight and being like, I thought this was going to be the thing that made me happy, but I've lost all this weight and like my problems are still here. And it always is, I think just like hard to hear that is a surprise to people, I think. But it makes sense because it's like, this is the cultural message that we have, that if you just change your body, then your life will be perfect and people will treat you well and you'll, you know, have an easy and happy life. And I think, you know, now I also see this with GLP-1s, like people's relationship with food changes so much oftentimes, sometimes to a place of like fear of like, I don't know what foods might make me feel sick. And, you know, sort of like a mourning of this food, which used to be something I really enjoyed. Like now I feel like I've lost that relationship. And so, I think getting really clear before you start any diet program, a GLP-1, anything like that, like what are you hoping is going to change in your life? Like it's so encouraging to hear you talk about that.
Yeah. And especially knowing that like we can achieve those things. Like if you want to feel confidence or acceptance, like we can work towards those things without needing to change your body or go through a diet plan or what I like to call starvation plan, because that's essentially what it is, and get kind of like the best of both worlds. But a lot of the work is not on the body. It's more so on the mind.
Yes, that your thoughts need to be addressed and sort of challenged and looked at. You know, again, your thoughts and your brain are often controlling that desire to begin with. It's not necessarily always something that your body is telling you needs to happen. It's usually something your brain has decided is going to be the thing that changes your life.
Right. And I mean, like, it's more complicated than that, as I'm sure you know, with the system that we're in. Sometimes to be respected in medical office, you need to be a certain weight to be, I don't know, to benefit from thin privilege or have a better shot at getting promoted. Like all of those things are true, unfortunately. So it's also kind of grieving what the reality of the world is, but knowing that your internal worth as a human being exists separately from what society thinks of you.
Yes, that the problem in what you just described isn't a person's larger body. The problem is the weight stigma that they are experiencing. And that can feel like splitting like the finest hair that's out there to people who are like, yeah, but it's the same outcome regardless. But the way we experience it is really different. Like racism, like sexism, when we can identify like that these stigmas and biases actually exist and are making things harder for you, then we can sort of give ourselves grace for the experiences we're having while still living in that same environment. Like it doesn't change the environment, but it changes your experience of it.
Right. And I think like that's how I really got into this work as a dietitian. I found out later in adulthood that I have ADHD. So like, you know, that veil being lifted after college, that I am existing in a world that wasn't really made for me in mind.
Yeah.
So knowing that I do benefit from thin privilege, but I could still participate in this social justice movement, advocating for those in larger bodies, because I can understand what it's like to be excluded in certain spaces.
Yes. Did you feel like there, you know, I don't know what your experience and like your training was like, but did you feel like there was sort of unlearning that you had to do in order to like show up as a dietitian who, you know, doesn't engage in weight stigma and who actually like walks the talk of body positivity?
Yeah, definitely. I think the training that dietitians get off the bat is very medicalized. And that makes sense. We're like medical professionals, but that just speaks to how, I don't want to say outdated, but how small of the scope of science we have currently of what health looks like. It's just so small-minded that we aren't able or comfortable to really examine what it's like to be healthy in a larger body. And instead of blaming the weight for everything, actually look at what the problem is at hand.
Yes, absolutely. So, weight becomes like such a scapegoat for so many issues. And, you know, for me personally, I've talked about this before on this podcast, but the Maintenance Phase podcast.
Love it.
It's so good. And, you know, that podcast really put words to a lot of what I was feeling of like, I know that there is something wrong about the way that we demonize fatness and the way that we, scapegoat fatness as a reason for medical issues, for so many problems. And I've shouted it out before, like I said, and I'll link some episodes in the show notes of this episode as well. But that's always a resource that I like to share with people as a starting point if you're feeling ready to sort of challenge some of these things that we've always considered like givens about the relationship between weight and health.
And that's like a whole systemic thing, right? Like the food supply in this country is really not set up for maximizing health for all people. There are a lot of barriers that we all have that access quality food and time to actually prepare these foods. So I think like highlighting those barriers, give people, just like allow them to remove some of that self-blame, because taking care of ourselves isn't as easy as it sounds nowadays.
Yes. And I can imagine that feels really complicated when you're, you know, trying to help people eat in a way that feels supportive to their bodies. And also acknowledging like we live in the context of a system that like doesn't provide us the most equitable access to foods that align with that goal, that feel really good to our bodies all the time. And so I'm curious kind of how you ride that line between like acknowledging that reality, but also not creating sort of like fear around foods.
Yeah, it's usually a hard one. I think the way it comes up in session isn't fear-based. It's more like comforting. Like we're doing the best we can with the tools we have accessible to us. And because they're here, or even if they're not here, you know, like sitting in my office, like simply listening to conversations like this is already giving the person agency to believe that they're making the changes necessary to have a healthier lifestyle and outlook.
Yeah. Absolutely. That, yeah, while we can acknowledge the reality of our food system, we can also acknowledge the autonomy and agency that we have within it, like within this structure that exists. And that, you know, in your role as a dietitian, like you're serving as a support to help them make and find those choices that are going to be supportive to them, again, in the context of, you know, the society that we live in. And I imagine as well that you also have to maybe navigate some unlearning there as well, because while there are genuine like issues within our food system, there's also a lot of like misinformation about, you know, what foods are harmful and why.
Right. And I think that's probably more accurate when we say like individualized work from client to client. Some of it is, yes, like what nutritional deficiencies are applicable to this client versus the other. But also like, are you working a 9 to 5 or are you working overnight? Is your child a picky eater or are you living in a multi-generational household? You know, so like all of those things play a large role with how we feed ourselves and how we take care of ourselves and must be taken into account versus tips that we hear online that assume none of those barriers exist.
Yes. And, you know, I feel this as a therapist as well. Like, I'm so glad that people have access to information online and, you know, on social media. But I just always try to reinforce like the biggest grain of salt with anything that you consume online, because it's not individualized to you. It's not specific to you. Some of the advice may actually be exactly the opposite of what I would recommend to you specifically based on what you specifically are experiencing. And, you know, that can get really challenging to be able to kind of sift through all of this information.
Definitely. But I think that kind of introduces the thought of exploring things that food is deeper than just that. You know, food is deeper than what we put on our plates. And there's a whole backstory of what makes it possible for us to feed ourselves and nourish ourselves appropriately.
Yes. Yeah, that kind of brings me back to what you were saying about the relationship between the brain and the body. Like the brain is making choices about what to eat, but like, can that be based in what the body is asking for, what the body is communicating, what the body needs to feel supported, rather than what the brain has decided is like best based on, you know, a bunch of maybe random information.
Right. I think people have put a lot of trust in the wisdom of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And they believe that the mind knows better than the body.
Yeah.
And sometimes I like to challenge clients of like, okay, what if your mind and your body are actually not enemies, but they're on the same team? Like they're both wanting to support you just in different ways. And you have to listen to both of them equally.
Yes. What that is bringing up for me is the inner critic. So because sometimes like it doesn't even feel like your brain is wanting what's best for you. When that inner critic is coming out, and in our example, we'll say about like body image stuff, it doesn't feel supportive. It doesn't feel like it's rooting for you. What would you say to someone maybe who's listening to this thinking like, God, to think that my brain is actually trying to support me when that inner critic is telling me that, you know, I need to change my body and I'm unlovable the way that I am?
Yeah, that's hard because I think that would require willingness from the client to explore things that are not seemingly related to food, you know, things that are more about their childhood, their beliefs about what good and bad bodies are like, beliefs of what it means to take care of your body. And if they're willing to have conversations like that, I like to explore, you know, like, what is the purpose of your body? What does your mind think the purpose of your body is to do what? To explore the world in what ways? Or does the inner critic even want you to have a relationship with your body?
Yeah, that's a big one. I think back to what you were saying of like, I think, especially in Western cultures, put so much emphasis on the wisdom of the mind over the wisdom of the body. Like, I think some of that there is almost this feeling of like, yeah, we need to be protected from our bodies, that if I felt this feeling, it would be too painful. There's no way I could handle it. And obviously that's what a lot of therapy is being like, what if we just like stuck one like pinky toe into the waters of that emotion? Like, do you think you could handle that? But yeah, this idea that I feel like what I'm hearing and what you're saying is that the inner critic is not necessarily your voice. That's not you. You don't have to hold stock in that, of that being you. Like you were saying, the messages that you've heard throughout your life, that this is a culmination of a bunch of different voices. Yeah, I feel like that's the biggest thing, is that you don't have to hold the voice of this inner critic as absolute truth.
Yeah, especially because like, I feel like because thoughts like that are created or built when we're such a young age, if you imagine like your younger self, right? Your younger self did not have any protection against any of those thoughts. You didn't have, you couldn't choose whether or not you wanted to believe that in the first place. You were so impressionable.
Yeah.
But now you can choose differently if it doesn't feel right anymore.
Yes. And frequent listeners to this podcast will know that I'm a big fan of internal family systems therapy. So internal family systems therapy believes that we have a lot of parts of ourselves, and that even the parts of ourselves that seem destructive or damaging in some way are trying to protect us from something. And I think, what this conversation is making me think of is how the inner critic is definitely trying to protect us from, many things probably, including, like touching base with what's going on in our bodies. Because what if something really scary is happening there? Trying to protect us from the criticism of others, trying to protect us from weight stigma, from, not receiving great medical care, from people, criticizing our bodies or our health. And so I think acknowledging the ways that our minds are trying to protect us, even when it feels bad, can be sort of healing.
I agree. I think it's really hard to do body image work if clients are not understanding that both could be true, or that, there is that protector in your mind, even if the words that they're saying doesn't sound supportive, but there's like, they're advocating for something deep within you that you may not even have the words to explain yourself.
Yes. And like you said, something that probably started in childhood that like maybe you don't even think about or realize that had such a big impact on you. But, of course, we were all exposed to these messages in our childhoods. One thing that always comes to mind for me is Friends. Like, that's my age kind of showing, but that was like a really formative show for me. And, the messages about Monica when, she was younger, she was in a larger body, and the flashback memories of her. And of course, it's Courtney Cox in a fat suit, and the storylines and the way she was portrayed then versus now, and literally being like unlovable then versus finally being able to be loved now. I mean, it's those things create messages that we hold, even though we didn't realize that that's what was happening.
For sure. Man, I didn't watch Friends, but that sounds like a lot.
Yeah. It's pretty rough. Sure, there were some parts of Friends that were enjoyable, but watching it back, you're like, oh man, there's some tough narratives in there to swallow through a 2026 lens. But yeah, I think, and so like people recognizing for themselves, like, for me, it's Friends. For you, maybe it's something else, but like, what were the stories and narratives that you adopted? And one of the reasons that you and I are even having this conversation today is because I got to see kind of a preview of some work that you've been doing on creating a workshop for teens about body image. And I'm so curious to hear kind of what inspired you to do that.
What a great question. I feel like the generation of teens we have now are very powerful. They can make a lot of change. I think they are brave enough to voice their opinions, even if it isn't necessarily what is considered the norm.
Yeah.
So if we can get them
almost to our side of like body neutrality or body appreciation, I think that could really set us up for just a fresh lens in how we see a relationship with our bodies. And at the same time, their minds are still very impressionable. So I feel like there's a lot of opportunity there for them to either fall into the trap or rally behind us to build that resilience.
Yeah. I really appreciate that perspective because I think a lot of the narrative around like teens and young people right now is how horribly impacted they are by social media and like rates of eating disorders and body image concerns and how social media is impacting that. And all of that is true. I'm not saying that it's not, but it's really cool to hear your perspective about like the potential there, that the qualities that you see in this generation of young people and the opportunity of like that story is not written in stone at this point. Like we can still change that and have an impact on that. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit about the ways that you are encouraging them to start thinking a little bit differently about their bodies.
Yeah, I think that age is really tough because they've, maybe early teens up until like maybe mid-teens, they feel like they know everything.
Yeah.
And maybe all of their life, they've gotten accustomed to how their bodies look up until that certain point. And knowing that they're also at the age where their bodies are going to start changing. I think that's really difficult for them. So I think like catching them where they are right before they start to see the change of like, hey, your self-worth, whether it is, benefiting from thin privilege, you're still someone of worth, even if your body changes outside of that thin privilege, or if you never benefited from it to begin with.
Yeah.
So I think knowing that these teens had a lot of their social experiences through a screen really helps them be more engaging when they're like assessing the messages that they're being told. I feel like to a certain extent, I feel like they're pretty anti-capitalist. I feel like these generations of teenagers are a little bit more critical of things like that. So when you tell them like, hey, don't you think this influencer's just like selling you something? Or don't you think like this recipe does not really sound good to me? Do you feel like they just are getting credibility because of, I don't know, their six pack or whatever? And they kind of get it.
Totally. There's an openness to, I think it's sort of like harnessing that like natural or organic teenage rebellion that like they kind of like want to challenge things. And yes, I think partially generationally and partially just being teenagers. But I think, especially for them, I think it's almost easier for millennials and certainly like above to challenge it a little bit more because we didn't grow up with it. So it just hasn't always just been around. But I think a lot about, maybe this is going to start to sound a little controversial, but I think the relationship with cosmetic procedures has been really interesting as well. At least like when I was growing up, I feel like plastic surgery was so taboo and you like didn't talk about it. And it was really only accessible to celebrities, the like mega wealthy. You didn't really like know a ton of people getting a lot of cosmetic procedures growing up, or if they did, they didn't talk about it. But now it is so normalized, which I think on the one hand is good because we're being like honest about what we expect, like beauty standards wise, that like, no, that beautiful person that you see on social media or on TV, like doesn't just look like that. They've had procedures done to look like that. And that's okay.
Right.
Like they have autonomy and can do what they want to their face and bodies. But, knowing that I think is important. But I also feel like there's this message that somehow that's empowering, that like now you have access to that too. And like you can choose to, get Botox and do these things, which like, again, it's really personal. And I think people have autonomy to do what they want. But it's this piece about it somehow having access being empowerment that starts to feel icky to me a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. It's almost like, oh, I have access to this thing that's making me more aligned with like standard beauty. And if you work hard enough, then you can kind of do it too. type of thing.
Yes. Yes. Like it's exactly what we were saying at the beginning about GLP-1s and being in a larger body, that like now if you're in a larger body, well, like that's your choice at this point. And like you could be thin if you wanted to, just get on a GLP-1. And I think with like plastic surgery, it's like you could align yourself with the beauty standard if you wanted to, because these procedures are available to you now. So like, you know, I've seen people say like, if you're not ugly, you're just poor or something like, and like, which on the one hand is like, okay, yeah, like I'm glad we're like being transparent about that. But on the other hand, it's like, and like, why do we have to align ourselves with these beauty standards anyway? Like that's the real problem, like not the access to the ability to align with it.
Right. And that is actually one of the big reasons why I got really into art. I'm not sure if maybe you can relate to this, but when I started getting into art, I was really worried about things being imperfect.
Yes.
But that was almost like a therapeutic exercise for me to be like, you know, I'm going to accept this imperfection because it's what I was able to like create or whatever. And I think same could be said about our bodies. Now, when I look at something that I've crocheted way at the beginning of like, when I picked up this hobby, of course, I'm going to see things that I probably wouldn't do now, but I look at it a lot more fondly because it was where I was at the time.
Yeah.
And I just really wish people were able to see things that way, you know, like this stretch mark or this wrinkle, this whatever dress size. I may feel a certain way about it, and that's neither good nor bad. It just is part of the personal story of my body, which is just an instrument that helps me live my life. I move through the world with my body, not something to change in order to present myself a certain way to the world.
Yes. Yes. And something that I remember that you said in your presentation is like, who benefits from you feeling that way about yourself? Like, who benefits from you obsessing about your quote unquote imperfections? Who benefits from you feeling like you're not enough? Who benefits from you feeling like you're one Botox injection or one skincare cream or one exercise regime away from being acceptable? And it's not us. We're not benefiting from that. You know, like I don't benefit from that feeling towards myself.
Right. I think of like your clients who were able to get there and they still didn't really feel fulfilled.
Yeah.
So if it wasn't for their inherent happiness, then what was it all for? You know, all of like the time, energy, resources, and money that were spent essentially like us chasing a lie that we were told.
Yeah.
And it's okay to grieve that lie and to be angry about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's like part of the process that helps it feel like a genuine relationship with your true body rather than like, you know, I don't want to say fake, but like just appreciating appearance less versus appreciating appearance that could be beautiful in different definitions of it.
Yes. Yeah. That you can, through accepting that your body is just, I mean, you know, as many like cultures and spiritual beliefs say, like a vessel for you to like experience your life in, and that, you know, maybe your life wasn't meant to be spent making your body your primary project. Like maybe, you know, aligning yourself with a arbitrary beauty standard isn't the mission of your life. And that can feel really painful when you're like, but I've dedicated 20 years, 30 years of my life to aligning myself with that. And I feel like I finally did it. And what do you mean that this is not happiness? What do you mean that this is not fulfilling? And yeah, you used the word grief, and I think it absolutely is grief, that you have to grieve that.
Yeah, I know. It's so much deeper than people realize. And that's part of why I love the work so much. It's so important. And there's so much that we can do to improve it. But again, kind of what we talked about earlier, it's like assessing their readiness to explore that with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And if someone is listening to this, which I'm sure they are, and thinking to themselves, like, I don't even know what my readiness is. Like, this does sound intense. This does sound deep and hard and painful. Where would you suggest that people sort of begin? Like what feels like a bite-sized like first step or resource that people could kind of turn to?
Well, okay, first off, I would look through the body image spectrum with them. And for those who are unfamiliar, body image is not just like a flip of a coin. It's not just like good or bad body image. It really exists in a spectrum. So on one end, there's like body hatred, then neutrality, then acceptance, then respect, then love. So just because we're wanting to move away from body hatred doesn't really mean just being ooey gooey gushy about all aspects of my body. I think that's a little unrealistic.
Yeah.
But there's so much relief. And so your world just widens when we move from body hatred to neutrality.
Yeah. One step.
Yeah. And so even moving from that one step, an exercise that I find really helpful is just having people think about creating a different dialogue between your mind and your body.
Yeah. What does that look like?
So if the only way that your mind and your body speak to one another is one of judgment, I usually just invite some neutrality, right?
Yeah.
So like it could be just explaining a fact, like my legs are sore today. I don't know. My legs helped me get up the stairs today or whatever. But it could also be, describing the functionality of your body. I understand that there's, it's not applicable to everybody.
Sure.
I think there's a big caveat with like ableism in that exercise, but I usually like starting there. If I didn't have my ability to see, as simple as that, the smaller it seems, the better it is for the exercise.
Yeah.
Really exploring the ways in which we take our bodies for granted.
Yeah.
Really just opens up the conversation. So like if I weren't able to see, how differently would I start my day?
Yeah.
If my favorite one is I'm thankful for my ability to hear, because if I lost that ability, I wouldn't be able to hear my friends sing me a happy birthday every year.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even, breathing. I talk all the time with my clients about like, if breathing were like an app or a pill or like something you could buy, like it would be, it would be the hottest selling item there is, because like, man, nothing works as well as a deep breath in a stressful moment. Like, my God, the release that you feel. So yeah, like not only that breathing allows me to talk or sing or keeps me alive, but it also is like such an amazing tool for like regulating myself and getting through hard moments. And I love that you said like the way that the mind and the body talk to each other, that like it goes both ways, because like, are you waiting till your body like screams at you that it's hungry, that your stomach is like growling and aching and you feel like nauseous? Like you can soften that by like noticing sooner that like, oh, I think I might be starting to get a little hungry. Maybe I should eat something. And that it's not just that the mind is, yelling at the body, but that like sometimes the opposite happens too, because we're not honoring what it's asking for.
For sure. And it's really like a delicate and very intimate relationship, but it's all yours. And I think there's like something really cool about that. It's just like you have agency over how that conversation goes. And it's not going to be easy, but it's a skill. It's a skill. And so you kind of have to like commit the time to develop that skill. And even if it feels fake for the first time I have clients do it, I hope that doesn't discourage them, but rephrasing it as a skill, I think helps a lot of the times.
Yes. Yeah. So I feel like you're sort of that this like first step that you're recommending is very much like a noticing phase, like noticing where you're at on that spectrum. Like maybe you think you're all the way in like, body hate, but like really you're kind of like in more of a neutral space, really. And so noticing that, and then noticing what those conversations are like between the brain and the body, and just like starting to maybe gently challenge that of like, does it need to be like this?
Like how can I expect my So like body image, right? It's like the thoughts and feelings that we have about our body. Of course, those thoughts and feelings are going to be negative if that's what it hears all day.
Yeah, right.
That's how I speak to my body all day. So like kind of giving it just a different narrative to play off of. Like it's appreciated. There are functions that my body has that I am thankful for. So saying thank you to it.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean that you love it, but at least you're giving it it's hearing different things than just judgment and hatred.
Yeah. Yeah. And that can make a huge difference. Well, I'm curious, Kate, what you're going to do before your next session.
Let's see. Before my next session, I'm probably going to spend time with my husband, my family. It's been a really challenging week in many different ways. So I'm excited to just spend my time outside of being like a dietitian and just feel like a person outside of that.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That is no small feat that to just, to ground yourself in the other people in your life. And I think, especially with what we've been talking about of like body image, which can feel so like internal, like looking in, like focusing on ourselves, like that opportunity to be like, crack open that lens a little bit and be like, oh my God, all these people that I love and care about. Like you mentioned before, like sometimes like social isolation comes with like restrictive eating or intense dieting because like, oh, like I can't go to that restaurant, like I can't eat anything. And that, like connecting with other people is like also a way to kind of give you that perspective and that appreciation for like the body that allows you to show up and be with those people. And I love that that's kind of the self-care that you're going to engage in.
Thank you. I'm so thankful that my body was able to help me have this conversation with you and connect in so many different ways. So thank you so much for having me on.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I am thankful to my body as well, my body and mind that came together to have this conversation. Thank you so much, Kate. I really enjoyed talking to you today.
Of course.
That was Kate Aragon, and I really hope that this one landed for you because I think it's one of those episodes that has something for almost everyone, whether you're deep in this work or just starting to get curious. The thing that I personally keep thinking about is the body image spectrum: hatred, neutrality, acceptance, respect, love, and the idea that you don't have to leap all the way to loving your body, you just have to take one step on that spectrum. That could be from hatred to neutrality, or from my body is the enemy to my legs are sore today. Like that's it. That's enough to start widening your scope. So your in-between sessions homework this week is to notice where you are on that spectrum. Just notice. No pressure to move anywhere yet. And if you want to try something small, you could practice saying one neutral statement about your body today. Not a compliment, just a fact, and just see how that feels. Today, I might personally go with, my body feels a bit cold, and I'm noticing some soreness between my shoulder blades. Feel free to comment on social media to let me know what you're noticing today. While Kate is at the Tasty Balance location in St. Louis, she is licensed to work with clients in Missouri, Kansas, Illinois, and Colorado. I'll link her info in the show notes. And as always, I've linked some additional resources that we talked about down in the show notes too, including the Maintenance Phase podcast episodes on BMI and weight science that are very much worth a listen. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I hope that you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it and that you'll consider leaving a review if you haven't yet. It really does help more people find this podcast. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you next time in between sessions.